Welcome to our webinar today. We are going to talk about cybersecurity in China, especially the multi-level protection scheme 2.0, in short, MLPS. With me today are my two colleagues, Liu Liu and Zihao Liao, and they will later on tell you more about the MLPS. I will start with a short introduction of the backgrounds of the multi-level protection scheme and the cybersecurity legislative project in China. So already as early as 2014, Xi Jinping said that there cannot be a national security without cybersecurity. So starting from that time, there has been a lot of activity related to legislation to cybersecurity. And in 2017, the cybersecurity law actually came into effect. So with this quote, Xi Jinping brought cybersecurity in a direct contact with national security. And this shows how important cybersecurity is in the eyes of the Chinese government. Not only cybersecurity is related to national security, but there have been several new regulations and new trends in China that are related to national security in general. There is a trend of nationalization, which is shown especially in the efforts to decouple itself from other countries and to create a fully domestic supply chain, which is not only to have more national security, but also to minimize dependency on other countries. This is especially important, or even got more important when seeing the trade war between the United States and China, which led China to experience what happens if the United States put sanctions on certain industries in China. So the Chinese government also tries to strengthen the domestic circulation and has a lot of new reforms aimed at making the country's markets function more efficiently and more independently. This leads to stricter controls and active prosecution by authorities, and thereby limits the scope for action for foreign companies, and also leads to them being more cautious and to pay more attention to being compliant to the existing laws. So there are several risks or several topics that foreign companies need to pay attention to. One is the Made in China 2025 strategy, which has been announced several years ago, and which has not been communicated very open during the last few years, as China realized that they got very bad feedback in regard of this strategy from other countries, or very negative consequences from communicating it very openly. And therefore, China still strengthens and supports the 10 industries that were named in the Made in China 2025 plan to become the world leading industries until 2025, but it doesn't communicate it as openly as before. However, as this plan still exists, is something that foreign companies need to keep in mind. Also, there have been guiding principles for expanding investments in strategic emerging industries, and further principles which also will have a certain impact on foreign companies. For today, what we will be talking about, and which is certainly also a big issue for foreign companies, is the cybersecurity law and data security law, and especially the multi-level protection scheme, which is one part of the cybersecurity regime in China. This is all, of course, also related to the corporate social credit system, which should fully come into force in this year, actually, which is collecting information about companies and persons, and which is monitoring the compliance of companies and persons to existing laws. So the compliance to cybersecurity law and the multi-level protection scheme, therefore, is also monitored under the corporate social credit system, and non-compliance might lead to punishment. So with this, I hand over to my colleague, who will tell some more about the legal background of the multi-level protection scheme.
Thank you very much. Before I start with the specific content of the MLPS, I would like to emphasize the importance of the cybersecurity in China again. The Chinese government is focusing on the cybersecurity and also combine the social credit system and the cybersecurity. Personal information security and protection are getting more and more attention in China. So as I'm showing in this chart, Chinese State Information Office has also made this an important task. And according to cybersecurity related laws and regulations, those who don't fulfill the obligations of the cybersecurity law or administrative regulations will suffer severe penalties. Nowadays, if the company is against the cybersecurity rules, it's also possible that it will be listed in the Chinese social credit system. When the company is blacklisted, and then there are many disadvantages or restrictions will come to the company. And in the worst case, it may even be excluded from doing business in China. And the further details of the corporate social credit system have already been explained in our previous webinar, which can be found on our YouTube channel. Now let's get into the main topic of MLPS. At first, let's look at the legal basis of the MLPS. Article 21st of the Chinese cybersecurity law explicitly states that China should implement the rules for graded protection of cybersecurity. And according to this article, the network operator has the duty to ensure that the network is free from interference, damage, or unauthorized access. And they also have to prevent network data from being disclosed, stolen, or falsified. This is the first time that the concept of multi-level protection scheme, namely MLPS, has been formally introduced in the law. So the concept of MLPS was regulated in the law not until 2017. There were already many administrative regulations or national standards ruling MLPS. And MLPS is gaining an increasingly important significance in China after many years of continuous development or revise. MLPS is changed from MLPS 1.0 to MLPS 2.0. Regarding the compression of laws and regulations, MLPS 1.0 is mainly designed with regulations before 2016. At that time, there was no law formally regulating MLPS. China made use some administrative regulations or national standards to regulate MLPS. For example, the administrative measures for the classified protection of information security or the classification guide for classified protection of information system security. Compared with MLPS 1.0, the changes of regulations in MLPS 2.0 can be divided into two aspects. First, MLPS has been regulated in the law, no longer only in the administrative regulations or the national standards. Second, China has also published more new national standards. These national standards detail the content of the MLPS. For example, the baseline for classified protection of cybersecurity or the implementation guide for classified protection of cybersecurity. Based on these national standards, the companies can get a clear picture of MLPS. Furthermore, the comparison of the objects of protection and the scope of MLPS should also be considered. According to MLPS 1.0, the objects of MLPS only refer to information system, but with the development of the new technologies, there are also many new objects that also need to be controlled. For example, the basic information network or cloud computer platform, all of that are also controlled under MLPS 2.0. And in relation with the scope of MLPS, only individual who build their own network has no duty to implement MLPS. That means all companies, institutions, or departments in all regions in China should carry out MLPS. Here we can have a summary, and MLPS is comprehensive and there is no place to hide. In addition, both in terms of process and the requirements, MLPS 2.0 is a major upgrade over MLPS 1.0. For example, for information system of level 2, there are clear and more specific implementation requirements, such as personal information protection. Or another example, for the system above level 3, protection requirements on network products or service security is also added. And my colleague will further explain the specific process and all of these requirements of MLPS.
Yeah, thank you, Zihao. As my colleague Zihao has mentioned, the concept of system 2, level 2, system of level 3 and above, I will come to explain how systems are classified under Chinese cybersecurity law first. And the law set a standard to determine the safety level of systems. That is, the grading, also the classification of systems, is based on the damage degree to the infringed object if the system is damaged. If a system is damaged due to data loss or malicious tampering, malicious operations or hacking, etc., and thus causes a general damage to the legitimate rights of Chinese citizens and organizations, then this system is level 1. And as you can see the chart, if a system is damaged, then causes serious damage to the legitimate rights of citizens and organizations, or it causes general damage to the society order or public interest, this system is graded as level 2. If a company has a system of level 1, your company only needs to protect it by yourself. But for the system of level 2 or above, external guide, external supervision from Chinese authority, and external assessment will be involved, which also means the higher the level the system is, the more obligations your company will be faced with to fulfill the MLPS compliance requirement. Then we come to the specific process of MLPS. And the general overview of MLPS process is, first, you need to determine the scope of systems in your company and grade these systems. Normally, a company will have more than one system, such as your official website system, your OS system, CRM system, business operation system, etc. And if your company has a simple system which has nothing to do with social order or public interest and nothing to do with Chinese state security, only if this system is damaged, it will cause some general damage to the rights and interests of Chinese citizens and organizations, not big stuff. Your company can also grade this system as level 1 and come to the second step, registration by Chinese authority. And if the authority agrees with the grading that this system is just level 1, then you don't need to do the following steps. Everything finished, and you will receive a certificate from the authority. However, if the authority disagrees with the grading, they may think that this system should have a higher level, then you have to go back to the first step. You need to grade your system again. It means in the very first step, you need to grade your system appropriately, neither very low, neither not very high. Our company can help with that. We can help to grade your systems appropriately. If the system is graded as level 2 or above, we can also help to register the grading by Chinese authority. For level 2 system or above, the authority will ask experts to assess the system, and the authority will verify if the grading is appropriate or not. If the authority say level 2 is acceptable, then the authority will issue a certificate which proves that the authority has received your registration application, and your company will have several months to do the following steps. And after registration by Chinese authority, we need to come to the third step, analysis and adaptation. Our company can help to analyze your system and give a report on the potential risks that the system has. Based on the report, we need to analyze the gap between our current system and the standard, and maybe we should buy some hardware or software equipment to adapt the system to a standardized system. And after the adaptation of system, we come to the fourth step, evaluation. The assessment institution will evaluate the system again, and they will also give a report if they think that the system has met the standard. Then to the fifth step, we can just submit the report to Chinese authority. The authority will verify the report and inspect the system again, and then they will issue us a final certificate, which means that the system has already met the compliance requirements under MLPS. And then we can just rest for a while, but it doesn't mean that this is the end, because the authority will keep monitoring. Even if we got a certificate, we should notice that level 3 system should be assessed every year. These MLPS compliance requirements will never end. Now we come to the requirements and assessment. On the left, it is a document that is requirement GB-T 22239/2019. This document is released from Chinese authority, and it has pretty much content, as it says some very specific requirements that the system should fulfill, very detailed, such as physical environment, communication network, security boundary, etc. in MLPS. And on the right, it is another document from Chinese authority, which is a guide to the assessment institutions. And as you can see, this page just gives us some examples in these two documents. The documents on the left set a requirement that unique identification and authentication should be provided to all users involved in wireless communications. And on the right, the corresponding document just give us a hint on evaluation. What should be assessed specifically in detail and evaluated in terms of this requirement. And here it is another example of requirements and corresponding assessment standard. We don't need to reset it word by word, but we can clearly see that MLPS compliance requirement is pretty enforceable in China. It isn't some general requirements, but pretty in detail. Chinese authority has set pretty clear standards on MLPS, which we can follow and avoid any possible punishment from Chinese authority. And against the different level of system, the number of requirements is also different. Just take the national standard GB-T 22239/2019. There are different requirements for the individual levels. For level 1, about 80 articles in this document. For level 2, about 200. Level 3, about 310. And for level 4, even more. And I need to remind you of that this national standards is not the only standard on MLPS. For MLPS compliance project, you need to check the other standards that my colleague Zihao has already said before. Next, my colleague Mareike will further talk about the MLPS project management.
Thank you very much, Lilo. So I will take over, and as you have seen from parts of my colleagues, this is the MLPS is in general a very complex topic. Not only are there a lot of different standards and regulations which are related to the MLPS and need to be taken into consideration. Also, there are hurdles like how to determine which security level actually is necessary for a certain IT system. And then you of course need to analyze, if you have determined the level of your IT system, which requirements are important for your level of the IT system, and what do you need to implement now. So that means what we have seen a lot in our projects, that most companies are a little bit overwhelmed by the regulations and do not really know where to start. In theory, it is possible that companies determine the security level of their IT systems by themselves. But from our experience, we don't recommend to do so. As my colleague Lilio said, if you do it wrong, if you decide that for example, your IT system, your ERP system is level 2, and then in the end it's level 3, you will have to start all over again. So from our experience, it is better to get professional help from the very beginning. So that's what we provide. You can see us here, CHINABRAND Project Management. So we are the contact point for the client in projects like MLPS. And for the client, that means they don't need to directly communicate with Chinese authorities. They don't need to find Chinese IT consultants, IT technicians. They don't need to get an IT lawyer, a legal expert on these laws. And they also don't need to look for an external certified expert for these projects. So in general, when we start projects like that, our IT consultants in China will first do assessment and all the technical stuff like assessment of IT systems, gathering the necessary information on the equipment, assess the security technologies already in place, and do a gap analysis and so on. So all this IT stuff will be done by our technicians. They will be in direct contact with the IT staff of the client on site in China, and if necessary, we will also come on site to do all of this necessary things. And then later on the project, if it's necessary to involve a legal expert, we also will do the communication with this legal expert and get its services. Also, it is necessary to have an external certified expert. As we've mentioned before, if your IT systems are higher than level 2, it is mandatory to at 2 stages of the project to involve an external certified expert. The first step is already before registering the security level of your IT system with the Public Security Bureau, meaning the report that you write about determining the level of your IT systems needs to be double checked by an external certified company. And later on, after you did your gap analysis and after you changed your system, or you changed certain parts of your IT system, there will also be the necessity to do a security assessment, which needs to be conducted by an external certified expert. So all in all, this project is partly IT, partly legal. So communication in all of these departments needs to be done. So it's easier to have a project management with with experienced person in legal matters as well as IT matters to avoid any misunderstandings or communication problems. So as these projects are really complex, these projects will take some time. It depends on which security level your IT system is in. And just to remind you once more, normal companies don't only have one IT system. It's not like we're analyzing the whole IT of a company like one system, but there are different IT systems. From our experience, most companies will have from 2 to maybe 5 or 6 IT systems. So each of these systems takes a certain time to implement the MLPS. For level 1, it doesn't take a lot of time. As mentioned before, for level 1, it's voluntarily to do the MLPS, and it's not really necessary to register it. So if there are IT systems from level 1 and you still want to register it, it might only take up to 5 working days. So this means does not mean that we are finished in 5 days, but we will roughly work 5 days. Then for the other levels, level 2 to level 5, we wrote here up to 60 days, but actually it's very hard to say how long it will take. First, level 5 systems we normally don't touch, because level 5 of security grading is reserved to authorities and some state institutions. So normally normal companies won't have IT systems that will be graded level 5. So for level 2 to level 4, it still depends very much on the security level, how long it takes, on the complexity of the systems, and of course on the deviation from the mandatory standards. So if there's a huge gap between how the IT system should be and how it is at the moment, it will obviously take more time to fix it and to amend it according to the requirements of the cybersecurity law. Also, it depends on the time necessary for communication. So if it takes longer for the client to provide the necessary information, it might take longer, but it might also take longer if, for example, the authorities like the Public Security Bureau in China work slower than it should. So in general, it can be said this is not a project that you will be able to finish in 1 or 2 weeks, but it's a project that will take a certain amount of time. Normally, we start with the first 2 steps, which you can see here again. My colleague Lilia already explained what will be done. Like, first step is determining the protection level necessary, like the security level of the IT systems. And the second step here in a little bit darker blue is the registration of the security level with the Public Security Bureau. So for these first steps, with which all of the MLPS projects will start, we roughly need like 1 month or 2 months, depending on depending on all the factors that I mentioned before. So actually, yes, as mentioned before, it's a very complex project, and it will definitely take time. So this is nothing to rush through, and it should be done right from the beginning. So there shouldn't be any mistakes, and also companies should be aware that they should have one person that is responsible for this project and that answers to any requirements and any requests that we have, because there needs to be a lot of communication between us and the company. So that's it from our side. Of course, 30 minutes are not enough to cover all of the details of MLPS. However, if you have more questions, please feel free to contact me or my colleagues anytime, and we are very happy to answer your questions. With that, I want to thank you again for your attention and hope to see you soon in our other webinars. Bye-bye, and have a nice day.